Hi, Cindy. Thanks for having me.
Hi there, Sade. How are you? It's been a long time since I've seen you.
I know it has been a long time. I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. Are you doing good?
Yeah, I am.
You're still in the battle, I see.
It doesn't end. It doesn't
It
end.
doesn't end. Look, I read the article that you wrote. I want to show our audience this article that you published in the South Seattle Emerald, and you wrote a very powerful, provocative article about what the bail system, how it's working, what's happening here in King County, particularly. And there's a lot of issues in here that you raise, and I want to give you an opportunity to unpack. So I just kind of want to
Mhm.
turn this over to you to just kind of give us an overview, both of the issue that you wrote about, the issue that you're on the front line fighting about. Talk to our community about this bail issue and how this is perpetuating here in King County in the Seattle area.
Yeah. So, I'll talk specifically about the King County, the felony court system, which is the state courts. There's one in Seattle and there's also one in Kent. What is happening and what is happening on the misdemeanor level as well is that our community members are being, a large bail is being imposed on them. And statistics show that, Black people held in the King County jails receive 45 or 40% higher bail than white people, or 40% higher bail than everybody else. And white people receive 25% less. And so we're seeing this disparity from the beginning. And that disparity also manifests in charging disparities, right? So police make reports, they pick and choose what facts they want to add in or allegations they want to add in. A lot of the times they're completely untrue. And then prosecutors decide based on those statements from police what they're going to charge. And what we see again and again is that people who look like us are charged, the charges that we receive are just substantially higher and more substantial than the charges that white individuals receive. And so when the court gets the case, you go, a community member will go before the court and the court will read the probable cause certification. The probable cause certification is what the police officer wrote. And then, of course, the charges that the prosecutor brings. The court makes a determination based on the statements that the police wrote and the charges that the prosecutors brought. And that's where you see a huge situation where our community members are being held on hundreds of thousands of dollars of bail. But even if it was, $50,000 bail, how many people in our community could even turn over 10% of that, $5,000? Not that many people in the Seattle area, not that many people nationally have $5,000 to hand over. In the bail system, what happens? There's a Washington state court rule, or what's legislated is essentially that the bail companies will put forth all of the bail to the courts, but the individual has to pay the bail organization or the bail company 10 to 15%. In Washington, it's 10%. And what happens is that you never get that 10% back. And then you have to put down collateral. So if there's some reason why you can't appear in court, sickness, or you can't get transportation because we don't have a substantial public transportation system, then you lose that 10%, but you also lose the collateral you put down. So essentially, the courts are allowing the bail companies to extract resources from community that community just simply doesn't have. And in exchange for that, if you can't post the bail, if you don't have the resources, you're stuck in jail. And who's more likely to not have the resources in the United States? That's based on a genocidal slave society, a capitalist society where we have just been completely extracted from our entirety of our existence here. And so our community members are languishing away in these jails. And what's happening is the King County Jail in Seattle has a national suicide rate that's 8 times the national average. We just had a horrific situation at the King County Jail where Mr. Michael Rowland, I would say, was murdered. He was pinned down in the prone position, just like Mr. George Floyd was, and he was alive when he went into the King County Jail, and he passed away inside of the King County Jail. And so what the court is essentially saying by imposing this bail, what the cops are writing in affidavits, what the prosecutors are charging is saying that if you don't have the money, then your life is at risk. And so I hope that is a good summary of what's going on. But it's egregious what's happening to our community members, the theft of resources from family members, the loss of collateral, just an ongoing issue, and the health disparities that happen in the King County Jail. There was an audit in 2021, which is what I pulled some of the statistics from in the article. But in 2021, King County's own audit, and it's on the King County website, determined that, hey, like, we have race disparities, but it's not just in how much the bail is imposed. It is in what kind of sanctions, infractions are being had. Black people receive higher sanctions and infractions. We get infracted more, we get in trouble, we get harsher penalties. On top of that, our health disparities are worse. And so because we're being locked in a cage, obviously we're social creatures, we should not be in cages. Because we are experiencing that, we are coming out with our bodies destroyed, our minds destroyed. And so that's generally some of the issues that are going on with bail.
Did you happen to catch, there was an article written a few days ago. I did not bring it to highlight tonight. I actually read it this afternoon. It was in Newsweek, and it was about a man who was incarcerated, who was having a mental health crisis. This is in Arkansas, but they referenced that there is a Seattle attorney, and I actually thought about you when I read it, wondering if it was you that's the attorney involved in it. But it is so horrific what happened to him when he got incarcerated, and how he was thrown into a solitary confinement and basically left while the police officers or correction people, I don't quite know the job structure inside of these jails, but they were filing reports every single day saying that they did a cell check and the person was fine, when the person had actually died in the unit, and he was naked and crawled up. There was water sitting in the bottom of the. Do you know the story I'm talking about?
Yes, he died. He was completely emaciated. And I mean, U.S. jail systems everywhere else in the world, they consider it torture. And so what's happening in our jails is egregious. But I did read the story in Newsweek, and it was horrifying.
It's horrifying. Would you say that the description in that article is comparable to what is happening here in King County?
I would say yes. So I want to also bring to light the harm that has been done to our trans community members. Oftentimes people who are trans are being locked in a King County jail and held in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement, again, is internationally recognized as torture. Other countries do not do this, especially other Western nations as well. Nobody incarcerates more people than the United States, right? We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population and jail populations. It's absolutely horrific. But the extreme disregard and the harm, I mean, Mr. Michael Rowland would still be alive today had he not been pinned down, had he not been abused. And so there is an ongoing issue. The Arkansas case is specifically egregious, but it's not so far out of the norm in the jails. I mean, the same thing's happening in New York. Seattle's made national news, of course. So yes, the situation is similar.
What's the plan, or what's going on with what has occurred since you've written this article? Is there any movement or action being taken by King County? We just swore in last week a new King County prosecutor, Lisa Mannion. Is she involved in this issue at all? And what's the plan of action here to start trying to address some of these issues?
I can't speak specifically about what Lisa Mannion is doing. I do know that when we're in court, prosecutors are still asking for egregious amounts of bail. So the prosecutor's office is extremely complicit in all the activity that's going on. There has not been a change. As far as community-wise, there is a movement organized around Shut Down King County Jail. Decrim Seattle's running that, as well as Lavender Rights Project and Dismantle. We're all organizing to try to bring more attention. And this issue, the courts know about it, right? It's not like this hasn't been brought to the court's attention. There is also an issue. The ACLU brought a suit called Hammer versus King County. And that was, I believe, in 1989. And that was a lawsuit about the conditions in the King County jail. And I believe that, one, it's ongoing. I know that they're still under the settlement agreement, but King County Jail is not compliant with that settlement agreement. And so these issues aren't just, something that's happened in 2023. I mean, I'm 36 years old. This is almost going on 40 years, and this has been happening before, obviously, because, litigation takes a while. But the harm that's been done is ongoing and continuous. And just now, people are starting to learn about it.
What type of issues are Black people being arrested for that is putting them in this position?
Oh, everything. I mean, yeah, it's so over the summer of 2020, we were working on a protest campaign, and it wasn't just Black people. I want to be clear. This criminal legal system preys on everybody. The most egregious disparities happen to Black people, right, and Indigenous people as well. So there should be a solidarity across the board. What's happening is a lot of violence in the King County jails. But when the protests were going on, SPD was just broadly sweeping, infringing on people's First Amendment rights. And there are federal court cases going on right now. There's federal litigation regarding SPD's activity, and there has been since the 2020 protests. But their violence, they were just dragging people, throwing them in the King County jail, and they were just being held and being harmed in the meantime. I mean, there's so many people. And so people just got swept up for protesting, right? Like something that is not in, the Seventh Amendment or something like that, literally in the First Amendment, your right to do so. And so there's just been a complete disregard. So what happens is there's a lot of, preaching about, oh, this is how you act around police, but there is no way for us to be safe, right? I mean, whether we're smoking cigarettes or whether we're sitting in our homes, we've seen all of people like us get harmed by police in so many different ways.
There's a lot of narrative, in the paper today. There's an article that came out about Nike pulling out of downtown Seattle. There's a lot of commentary about the fact that Seattle has not recovered at all post-COVID. It's laced with drugs and just a lot of bad activity in Seattle. And so there's this notion that, well, let me just ask you this. Given that we are still here in the Seattle community, still not even, I don't know what the data is, 10% recovered post-COVID, and it seems like the crime is increasing here. What are your thoughts about what are public safety officials, what do we do to try to help deal with this issue of the mass incarceration, but at the same time, the growing drugs and violence and businesses leaving the Seattle? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So a lot of times, businesses and community is, juxtaposed against people who are getting charged and incarcerated. And the reality is that we're all on the same side, right? And so what happens is in Seattle and King County spends $200 a day jailing people in the King County jail. That's $73,000 a year. That is not going to mental health care. That's not going to addiction therapy or any type of rehab. So what we're doing is we're literally burning money, caging people, traumatizing them, and then putting them back on the street and wondering why they can't get it together, right? So we have people without housing. We have a huge housing disparity here. And so when you don't have housing, you're getting priced out of where you grew up. People used to self-medicate. So I believe the statistics starts like 64% of jails, 50 or so percent of state prisons, and 45% of federal prisons, those are people with serious mental health crises. And so what are we doing? In other places around the world, they invest in people's public services, resources for people so that they can get the care that they need. If you gave any individual going through the criminal legal system $200 a day, we would never see them again. But we're unwilling to do that. We're unwilling to care for people. What we're willing to do is throw them away. And so we would save so much money. If you want to put it in a capitalist perspective about money, we would save so much money just investing in people as opposed to throwing people away. For example, it's been calculated that $1.2 trillion a year is gone into the criminal legal system nationally, and that's dealing with all the collateral consequences. Mind you, free college for all was only $58 billion a year, right? So we're talking about 1.2 trillion compared to 58 billion. Then you have student debt is 1.6 trillion. And so this is annually how much money we are throwing into caging and traumatizing people. And so they made the criminal legal system, they made it a business, right? So in the King County jail, what happens is a lot of the work that's done in the King County jails, it runs on slave labor. Our people are incarcerated and they're trustees in the jail. They run the kitchen, they distribute all the resources for people who are also incarcerated. And so what it's doing is taking people, stealing their labor, and then, demonizing them. They don't pay them a fair wage, nothing. And then they put them back out with no resources. Again, if that money and those investments had gone into community members, we would never see them again. And our concern was crime. But I also want to note that since 1991, crime has dropped 50% in the United States. But in Washington state, and this is consistent nationally, since 1983, I believe, yes, to 2018, the state prison population went up 182%. From 1970 to 2015, the jail population in King County, so the jails, which is, what happens when people are held locally, went up 362%. So despite the fact that crime has been declining, and it was declining before they started doing increase in jails, by the way. It was declining way before that. So it wasn't caused by that. They're still incarcerating more people. So it has nothing to do with the crime levels, has nothing to do with keeping you safe. It doesn't keep you safe. Jail actually harms you. because when people are released, they're so destabilized. What studies have shown is that when people are let out on bail early or when they're giving housing first, they do not reoffend. And so that's what we should really be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. You know, it should not go unsaid that in many of these situations, in the situation I referenced back in Arkansas, the bail set for him was $1,000, which means that he needed $100 to get out of prison,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't have $100. And while some people might, you know, not understand that, I think that that highlights the magnitude
Yeah.
of a lot of these issues around poverty and what is actually happening to people.
Mm-hmm.
When people hear me talk, my peeve, my activism is heavily around earning parity. I don't know if you heard the show last week where we had several Black men on who have these we talked about mental health and the suffering in silence. But Black men are being put out into labor positions. They're being paid blue collar wages. And I continue to say there's nothing wrong with getting your hands dirty, but we live in a city that it requires at least $44 an hour to pay rent
Yeah.
around here. And so when you think about the man in Arkansas who didn't have $100 and his family could not get answers, could not understand what was happening with him. And the people that our tax dollars are paying to protect us are filling out their forms every night and saying that he's okay and everything's okay. And they've done checks, but in fact, he's laying dead in the cell. I actually saw some of the pictures. And to our viewers who followed the show, if you don't understand just how egregious this issue is, and to Sade's point about, I mean, this is about profiting off of poor people that is having a disproportionate impact on Black people and
Mm-hmm.
Black people's lives, and the generational trauma and the lineage that continues to carry that burden generation after generation. And so just kind of in our last couple minutes before we go to break, Sade, what do you want to see happen? What do you want to see happen in this circumstance, in these circumstances?
Yeah. We've had over 100 years of seeing how jails and prisons work in this country. And we've had tons of movements regarding reform. I believe one of the biggest reform movements was the Wickersham Commission. I believe that was 1929, where it was recognized that policing was terrible and that we have issues with jail. And we keep doing this thing where we keep allowing the prison and the criminal legal system to slightly morph itself. But statistic after statistic shows that we're still dying. And so I would like people and would love people to realize that there's no version of this where we are safe, where we are free, where we are liberated, and where we're cared for. The only thing that we need to do is abolish the King County Jail. We need to abolish jails nationally. And we need to talk about abolishing the state prison systems. We need to recognize that we're getting goods every single day. They're being processed by slave labor. It's across the board. It's an exception within the 13th Amendment. So we just need to stop this. There's just no way that there's no employing better people, no amount of training. There's nothing in this capitalist violent system that is going to keep us safe except abolition and community care.
How do we do that? What's the steps to take to abolish the prisons?
Yeah. So what the state and what the local municipalities need to do is they need to stop funding them, right? And they need to talk about putting money into our schools, right? Washington State, I believe they spend about $11,000 a year per student, but they'll spend over $200,000 a year sending a student or a child to Green Hill, right, which is a juvenile detention facility. And so that's such an insane disparity. It's like, how are we even talking about educating people or caring for people when we're spending pennies on the dollar when it comes to actually sending them an education and providing for them for the future? And so, stop spending money. It's just the state needs to stop spending money on it. It needs to stop spending money on policing. If they're not keeping us safe, we keep us safe, right? Police respond after the fact. Jails aren't keeping us safe. People need resources. And I say this, the ACLU did a study that I thought was really powerful. Every one of my clients, I was a public defender for 7 years. I've been practicing for 10 years, 11 years. And it's very clear that our clients have been in horrible situations. And Marion Papa said the best. She said, you were not introduced to violence by committing it first, right? It happens to you. And then there's a continuation and a cycle that goes on. So if we give people the care they need when they need it, we don't have these issues. We don't have these public safety concerns.
Do we have any elected officials who have put any bills forward to do this? To
That is what
take,
I that is what I don't know. And I'm not I doubt it for as far as complete abolition. That's, people think you're kind of crazy for that. But I mean, we've seen all
Mhm.
the ugly iterations of the criminal legal system and nothing's helping. So I think that's the only natural fruition. But I haven't seen any legislators talk about shutting down the jails yet.
All right. Well, this information is certainly helpful. This is why we do this show, is to have these conversations and get this information out to our communities and out to our elected officials so we know what we want from our elected officials to help us deal with these issues. Sade, I want to thank you for coming on today and keeping the community informed. We will be back in touch with you at some point this year so that we can try to get some updates, and particularly when we get into election season and we start talking what some of our candidates running for office and our elected officials. We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Thank you.